Hello, I'm Gurnek Bains of Global Future Think Tank, and welcome to the second episode of Lens, a blog series that aims to get under the skin of topical world issues. Now, the area that I want to talk about today is unconscious bias. And I want to talk about it in the context of one of the biggest natural experiments that we've had on it in the field of education. And the results of this natural experiment are particularly important given the UK government's decision this year again to base students' grades on teacher estimates, something that many countries are doing around the world because of the disruption to education around COVID. So as you know, unconscious bias refers to implicit tendencies we have within ourselves that aren't under conscious control, which leads to biases in favour of some groups versus others. Now, in education, there was quite a lot of research, over the past few years, showing that there was some evidence of unconscious bias in the way teachers made estimates of students' grades. So typically, what people found was that compared to the actual grades that people from different minority groups got, teachers would often underestimate the chances of certain minorities. Now, COVID has been a cataclysmic disaster for the world, but from an experimental point of view, it has led to some interesting data sets. And one of those in the UK was probably one of the largest natural experiments in the field, where in 2019, millions and millions of students got objective exam-based grades, but in 2020, it was all based on teacher estimates. Now, before the teacher estimates in 2019, there was a clear established hierarchy of performance across groups in education. So Chinese, Indian, and more latterly, Bangladeshi students tended to do well. White British, Pakistanis, and African students tended to be in the middle. And Roma, Irish travellers, and Afro-Caribbean students tended to be well below average. So what happened in 2020 when millions of these grades were given through teacher estimates? Well, guess what? The data is now out, and an establishment called Data Education Labs have looked at it, and guess what they found? No difference whatsoever. Those rankings that I talked about have been preserved in their entirety, and if anything, Afro-Caribbean and Roma kids have done better, as have children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, this is a counterintuitive result, and I think it's worth reflecting on, both in terms of lessons for education, but more generally for that whole field of unconscious bias. The first thing I want to say about it is that unconscious bias is almost treated as something that inevitably happens. Well, it didn't happen in this case, and it doesn't always need to happen. Conscious awareness of it, talking about it, and other interventions can play it down, and that's clear from this massive natural experiment that we've got. The second point is that actually, once you start looking at psychological studies, they show that stereotypes and bias are massively reduced when you have connection and contact with people. So, in this case, teachers were giving grades to children that they had taught for a number of years. And actually, I don't think it's surprising that in that context, the biasing and some of those unconscious effects that are well documented in other situations occurred. And thirdly, did you hear about these results? I expect you didn't. But if there had been bias, and if it had gone the other way, I think it would have been massively talked about in the news. And there's something in that which is, there's a publication bias. We tend to publish negative news. We tend to publish news that's problematic. And I think in this field, it's actually important to celebrate success. Britain is one of the more successfully diverse, globally outreaching societies. And it's important that we recognise positives when that occurs. And there are two very good reasons for doing that. One is, if all that you hear about this area is about the barriers that people from different backgrounds face and the problems that they will have and the biases that they will face, it affects the motivation of people from those minorities. They give up before they've even started. And secondly, if you're in the other camp and you're one of the teachers making those ratings, if you hear that this is happening systematically, does it legitimise, if you're that way inclined, your behaviour? So it's really important, I think, to be open and authentic about this. Now, I don't want to say that bias in education or other fields is gone. So, for example, there is evidence that there is bias when ethnic minority students apply to the elite Russell Group universities in the UK. There is also plenty of evidence of bias when CVs are being selected and actually through perfunctory interviews. But I think that illustrates one of the points that I've made. You need more connection, and you need to establish more ways of people connecting with the individual applying for a job or seeking an internship or another opportunity. And when you start getting those connections going, I think that's when bias starts to erode. And that would be one of the lessons to take out. Corporate world, for example, has relatively few people from ethnic minorities making it through their graduate selection schemes and through other programs onto the corporate ladder. Thinking about how you create familiarity and connection, I think, is important. And actually celebrating the successes that occur is important as well, in order to encourage people to apply for jobs and to feel that they have a reasonable chance in different fields. I think this natural experiment provides us with a really important lesson that unconscious bias isn't written into our DNA. It doesn't have to happen, and there are ways in which we can overcome it, and we need to celebrate when that occurs. Thank you very much, and we'll see you for the next blog, which I'll hopefully be doing from Australia, and it'll be talking about the psychology of fear and how countries that have gone for a zero COVID strategy, such as New Zealand, Australia and China, may find it more difficult than people recognise to rejoin planet Earth. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.